Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today we are going to have a basic deck building video for new players to Magic the Gathering. This is going to focus on one of the thematic aspects of the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms expansion set, specifically diving into and exploring the dungeon. There are 3 dungeons that are present in the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set, and they have different difficulty ratings, essentially. So your easiest one's going to be on the left and your most difficult one on the right. So think about a lot of the spells and effects that you're going to be playing. They're going to be very much centered around diving into the dungeon and exploring the dungeon. Now, typically these cards are going to cost just a little bit more, and kind of on the order of 1 mana, it seems to be. So think of it when you're playing these cards now. You're playing that 1 extra mana to get one of these effects that triggers when you move from room to room in the dungeon. These aren't huge effects, but they can add up over the course of the game. So if you have 4 or 5 of these, or you finish one of the dungeons, you can get a pretty significant and decent bonus. As a general strategy for blue and black decks, this works extremely well, is to deny your opponent the ability to put creatures onto the table. So you're going to see this theme in this deck, and it's going to be magnified several times over the course of this deck. The first 2 cards that we're going to talk about are Bar the Gate. There's going to be 3 copies of this in your deck. You're going to use this when your opponent's going to bring out a creature that could have really a deleterious effect on the battlefield. So something that has a big impact, you want to keep it from even coming into the game. So this is a counter spell on the left. In addition to that, you can venture into the dungeon as well. So you're going to deny your opponent that creature card, and you're going to dive into the dungeon. On the right, we have Power Word Kill, and this is a very potent and powerful card. It's only costs 2 mana, and it's an instant, and it destroys really any creature with the exception of angels, demons, devils, and dragons. So obviously there's a lot of dragons and devils and angels and devils in this deck, but there's not a ton of them. So you can target pretty much everything else, and for 2 mana you can destroy and slaughter something. One great aspect is you can wait for the opponent's turn and they can attack you with some heavy hitting monster, and then you just wipe it out. You kill it right when it's starting to attack you, and it kind of surprises your opponent, and it can really mess up their attack strategy for that round. To kind of take this a step further, we are going to start exploring some other cards that are present in this deck that have a similar effect. So the first one is going to be the Mind Flayer. This is a rare card, and if you have a bunch of these, I would recommend throwing them into the deck. It's a 5 casting cost card. It's a 3/3 monster creature. When it enters the battlefield, you can take control of a target creature. So that's fantastic. Nothing is better than using your opponent's creatures against them. If they bring out some massive, style creature, maybe it's a purple worm, nothing's better than to take that from them. They waste all the mana, you take the card from them, and then you attack them with their own creature. That's a fantastic strategy. So I have 3 of these in this example deck. The other thing I really like is the Gelatinous Cube, and there are 3 of these present also in this deck. This card, when it comes into play, you're basically going to engulf, and you're going to start dissolving whatever that creature actually is. You can take their creature and remove it from the battlefield, and then on the next turn, or if you have enough mana, you can dissolve that creature, and it's removed then from the game. The other thing is, too, you get a 4/3 creature to boot. So after you're done dissolving something, you can use it to fight. So by adding all of these different things together, Bar the Gate, the Mind Flayer, the Gelatinous Cube, and Power Word Kill, you are going to really be hurting your opponent. They won't be able to bring out any creatures, and you can control it to such a level that it's going to be hard for them to survive. So this is going to be the core strategy of a lot of blue and black decks throughout the history of Magic. You've seen this strategy, and I'm passing it on to you, and hopefully you can try this out. It's a lot of fun, and it's pretty annoying for your opponent. There are 4 copies of the Yuan-Ti Fang Blades present in this deck. Death Touch is a really potent ability, and you can use it to really wipe out almost any creature in the game that your Yuan-Ti does damage to. So kind of going along the same lines as denying their big creatures, The Yuan-Ti Fang Blade actually gives you more control over the battlefield in addition to those cards I just showed you. So for a 3 casting cost, you have something with Death Touch, and you can deal combat damage to a player. You can venture into the dungeon, and this is one of those effects that works really well with this deck. First, the Death Touch, you can kill almost any enemy in the opponent's play area, obviously if they block or interact with it. In addition to that, if this thing gets through and deals combat damage, you can venture into the dungeon. So we are going to sort of take this strategy and we're going to enhance it. And one way that we are going to do that is with the Thieves' Tools. So Thieves' Tools basically makes one of your creatures unblockable, and as long as it has a power of 3 or less, so the Yuan-Ti has a power of 2. So if you want, you can equip it onto the Yuan-Ti and it can just relentlessly assault the defenses of the enemy, and since it has the Thieves' Tools, it gets right through and hits the enemy player and allows you to dive into the dungeon. 2 other cards that I think synergize well with this strategy, and there are multiple copies of this in the deck. There are going to be 3 copies of the Shortcut Seeker and 4 copies of the Soul Knife Spy in this deck. So the first one is the Shortcut Seeker. So since we have the Thieves' Tools, we can also use them on other creatures and things that will get through and cause an effect. So this is the same thing when the Shortcut Seeker deals combat damage to a player venture into the dungeon. Very similar to the Yuan-Ti Fang Blade. In addition to that, on the right-hand side of the screen, we have the Soul Knife Spy, and it says whenever the Soul Knife Spy deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Well, the Thieves' Tools can also work on the Soul Knife Spy because it has a power of 3. Which is fantastic, and you're hitting the enemy, and then you're going to be able to draw a card. So you have a lot of synergies with the Thieves' Tools. So there are going to be 3 copies of those in your deck. In addition, all these other cards that interact very well with the Thieves' Tools and unblockable attacks. Card drawing is a massive advantage in Magic the Gathering. It can literally be the difference between winning and losing the game by just drawing anywhere from 1 to 3, 4, 5 cards over the course of a game. You can outpace what you're putting onto the table, and you can outpace your opponent very handily by doing this. So one thing that I like putting into this deck is just 2 copies of the Wizard class. The first level of Wizard classes, you have no maximum hand size. This is great, especially if you have some sort of mana bog down at the beginning of the game, and you can get Wizard class into play. You don't have to discard any cards because you have no maximum hand size. Once you hit level 2, this is very cool too, because then you can draw 2 cards, which kind of gets this moving. Now remember, if we have the Thieves' Tools on the Soul Knife Spy, we can be drawing a card, so Wizard class is going to kind of go along with this, and we're going to have even more card drawing. But where things really get out of control is the level 3. It says whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. So imagine that the Soul Knife Spy is sneaking through every round by using a copy of the Thieves' Tools. So it's hitting your opponent, you're drawing a card, but then on top of it all, you're adding counters, +1/+1 counters to creatures that you control. That's a fantastic option. Now, you don't necessarily want to put the counters on the Soul Knife Spy because now the Thieves' Tools won't work because it has a power of over 3. But you can use it on anything else in your deck. So you can start building up and buffing your creatures as you play the game. So once again, the Soul Knife Spy, Thieves' Tools, and the Wizard class, this is a great combination of cards to play in this deck. To kind of round out this deck, we have a host of different creatures with the dungeon delving theme. And the first one's the Clattering Skeletons. If this thing gets eradicated, it's a 4/3. You get to delve into the dungeon, which is pretty cool. The creature in the middle is a Displacer Beast. It's a very iconic creature that exists in the Dungeons & Dragons world. What's cool about this creature is that when it comes into play, you can venture into the dungeon, but you can also bounce this card back to your hand. So for 1 blue mana and 3 colorless, you can return the Displacer Beast to its owner's hand, and that can be your hand, and you can recast it and then venture into the dungeon once again. What's cool about these creatures is you can use it to sort of block and then bounce the creature back to your hand so you don't take any damage, and the Displacer Beast does not die. The one on the right is a Zombie Ogre, and there's only 2 copies of these in the deck due to the casting cost, which is a 5. It says, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, venture into the dungeon. Now, with all of the chaos that you're causing to your enemy's ranks of creatures, whether it's, using Power Word Kill or Death Touch or any of these other abilities, they're going to be losing creatures fairly often. To sum it up, blue and black decks have existed forever that focus on creature destruction and sort of creature denial, keeping them from coming into play, and also sort of creature possession, taking the enemy's creatures and using them against them. This deck actually has smatterings of all three of those. So use your Bar the Gate and your Power Word Kills to keep your enemy creatures in check. Use the Mind Flayer to steal your opponent's creatures, and use the Gelatinous Cubes to dissolve other creatures that you find annoying. Death Touch is great on the Yuan-Ti Fangblade to round out the strategy. Next, what you're going to be focusing on is Thieves' Tools and venturing into the dungeon. You have a host of different creatures that benefit from attacking and that can't be blocked and hit the enemy player directly. You're going to obviously kill them quicker, and you get special effects going off, and whether that's drawing cards or venturing into the dungeon, that's a fantastic combination. Finally, you have a host of creatures that can also aid in you delving into the dungeon. So the name of the game is fun. Kind of deny your opponent from building anything substantial, dive into the dungeon, and then whittle away at their health with unblockable creatures using your Thieves' Tools. This is a really great deck. Honestly, it's not that expensive to put together. You have, some of the rares, the Mind Flayers and the Gelatinous Cubes, which are kind of hard to get a hold of. But you can put this deck together, and it's a lot of fun. It's one of those decks that is super potent and powerful against a host of other decks. Now, one thing you'll notice in here, there aren't flyers present in the deck, but you have ways of mitigating those flyers, whether it's dissolving them with the Gelatinous Cube or stealing with the Mind Flayer. You can deny them from coming into the game with Bar the Gate, or you can simply Power Word Kill them. You have a host of options to deal with those nasty flyers or any other unblockable creatures that might be attacking you instead. So hopefully you've seen some cool tips and tricks that you can use to put together your own Magic decks. These are some basic strategies that you can see throughout all of the different sets of Magic the Gathering. These are common themes that you can use to bolster and power your decks. I want to thank you all for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.